welcome to today's edition of ECANIX. My name's Colby, and today we're working on 2004 Audi A4. This car has a 1.8 turbo engine, and when we first bought this car, it had 11 service codes. As you saw in the intro, today we're addressing the cam chain tensioner in regards to the actuator code that the computer was throwing. This car has been nothing but problems since we bought it. When we drove it to the house, it was dying, it was stalling, the idle was sporadic, it wouldn't accelerate. We had multiple issues. If that's your case, or any 1.8 turbo, go ahead and subscribe to my channel below, and I have other videos on my links there that will describe the other issues that we had to correct to make this car run right. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we're going to start by taking this plastic cover off the top of the engine. Looks like 3 flatheads. I've already have it removed. And what we're going to start with is we're going to start by popping this front cam cover off here. There's 2 hoses that are just in little plastic clips you can slide out of the way. There's a clip here, and there's one more clip right down here. And you can sneak him out of there. Okay, we've got the cam cover removed. The next thing we're going to do is remove the cam sensor, which is right here. There's 2 10mm bolts. For the clip, all you do is press it in and gently slide the harness off. We have 2 10mm. Okay, I got the bolts removed from the cam sensor. We're going to set that aside. Now we're going to take our ignition coils out. I am going to start with the ground here, which is a 10mm bolt. The older model vehicles sometimes had coils with 2 screws in them here. If you do have that kind, just go ahead and remove those 2 screws as well. I have the ground removed. I'm going to go ahead and slide the coils out. The way this is wired, I know which one goes where. However, if you think you may not remember, go ahead and use a Sharpie and number them 1, 2, 3, 4. So you don't have any misfires when you're done. I'm going to go ahead and just set those aside. And we're going to start loosening all of our valve cover bolts. We have 3 down here, 3 across the middle, and 3 on top. Okay, I got all the bolts removed from the valve cover. The next step I'm going to take is we are going to remove the 4 injectors here and lay them out of the way so that it's easier to remove the valve cover. These are the same kind of clips as the cam. I'm using a flathead screwdriver and just pushing up on the clip and giving it a little twist. And they pop right off. I'm going to grab my cam sensor wire along with the injectors. And I'm actually going to sneak those out of here and get those up out of the way as well. Okay, on this particular car, someone has already been in here and replaced the valve cover and left, unfortunately, all the hardware out of these brackets. But there is 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that need to come out here to slide these coolant tubes and air tubes out of the way to get the valve cover off. Back here on the back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this guy off right here, and I've already replaced this clamp, so you may need to use a pair of snips and cut the clamp off and replace it. Before you start this job, I would recommend buying a plethora of hose clamps because you will need them. Okay, I've loosened this clamp here. I have also loosened this small clamp here, and we're going to slide these 2 hoses off. I am going to set this out of the way so we have clearance for the valve cover. Okay, once you've made clearance, go ahead and grab the valve cover and give it a tug. Sometimes you may have to put a little screwdriver under there and get under a corner if it's been on a long time. I'm just going to pull these pipes to the side a little bit. There we have our valve cover. Now that the valve cover is off, I'm going to go ahead and move this pressure valve here. I'm going to say one more time, if you have a factory system on your vehicle, these clamps will probably have to be cut off and replaced. I went ahead and removed this clamp as well. I'm going to pull this guy out and set him aside, and the reason for that is when we're taking off our gasket here, I've just had this one off, so it's already loose. However, you're going to have RTV most likely under all the corners, and there also is a small half moon on this back side here that is usually RTV'd in there pretty well, that you're going to have to pry out. And you should be replacing this gasket, so don't worry about damaging it as long as you get it off. Once you have the gasket off, you're going to want to clean the gasket surface very well. Use a gasket scraper. Be careful, it is aluminum, it will scratch. I've already cleaned all the tracks out, got all the RTV off. Careful not to spill any RTV inside the engine. Okay, once we get the surfaces area here all clean of the RTV and silicone, you're going to want to go ahead and clean the bottom of the valve cover as well. The next step is we're going to set the timing at top dead center on number 1 cylinder, and we are going to check our timing marks. Get your 19mm 12-point socket. This helps if you have an assistant, and have him get down on the crank. You're going to be turning the crank clockwise, and you're going to turn it until you see there's a notch here and an arrow, and over here on the left side on the exhaust cam there's also a notch and an arrow. I've already set this timing to top dead center, but what you're going to do is if you have an assistant, go ahead and have them turn the crank very slowly from the bottom, laying on the ground, clockwise. There's also a notch on the front of this cam, and if you don't feel comfortable without the valve cover on, you can lay it in place, and there's actually a notch right on the front of the valve cover as well, where you can line up your marks. What I did personally was I stuck a screwdriver down in my number 1 spark plug hole, and it's easier for the assistant also. If you take all the spark plugs out, the engine will turn over much easier. Okay, I've set the timing to top dead center, and I want you to keep in mind I've already completed this job. I'm making this video for everyone else who has this issue. When I set this timing to top dead center, one thing I notice now, and this has already been done, that they are a little to the left and a little to the right here. They're not exactly lined up with the mark. Now, before I did this job, they were actually further, and that's how I actually discovered this was the problem. This notch was a little further left, and this notch was a little further right. Here's my old cam, and what the problem was is the guides had worn tracks in them, which made the timing go off just a little more than it already was, as well as throwing the actuator code. Okay, now that we're sure we've had our timing set on top dead center, another way when you're putting this back together, just as a little note, you can count 16 links. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 between these 2 notches, and once again they are kind of a little past on both sides. It's a good idea to take some white out and go ahead and mark your link end right here, and even a little white out on the cam. Be sure to wipe it down first because the oil won't let the white out stick. Make a mark over on this side as well on your link and your cam. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your special tool. This one actually came with this new actuator when we bought it, and you're going to make sure your chain's pushed forward. You're going to slide this down into the hole. There is a hole on the bottom guide. Get that in there and go ahead and use that 5mm and start wrenching that in and tighten that baby all the way down until your actuator is completely compressed. Okay, once you have your actuator all the way tightened down, we're going to go ahead and start removing this intake cam. Your first step is going to be to remove these 4 T30 Torx bits. And for a little side note, once again, make sure you have a quality T30. I ruined 2 cheap T30s, and I damn near stripped out a couple bolts with the cheap bits. So make sure you have a quality T30 to get these out. They are tight, and the last thing you want is to strip these babies out. Once you have that front cover off, you're going to slowly and evenly take all of these bolts off here, so that that cam is just going to be basically laying there in its seat. I used a little pick. Some of these had some sludge in them, so I would scrape the sludge out and kind of wipe it out. And make sure you're pressing down real hard when you're using that T30 so it doesn't slip out and damage anything. Once you get this loose, and like I said, once again, slowly and evenly take this off, the cam will just be laying there. At that point, you're going to move to the other side. You're going to go ahead and leave the timing belt on, and you're going to be loosening these first. I personally loosened these first 3 and took them off completely, but these 2 I ended up leaving in because you don't want to get too much slack on your timing belts and let that cam come completely out. At this point, you have all these covers off here. This cam is just laying there. Like I said, these 3 are completely removed. I left these 2 about halfway in. The object here is to keep this belt tight, and what's going to happen is you're going to have to shift this cam upward to be able to get this all separated because the chain's really tight. You're going to want to remove the bolts on the actual actuator itself. Another harness like the other ones that pushes in and slides off. There is 3 bolts out here on the back side, and there is 1 bolt right here that you're going to want to take loose, and then your cam actuator will just be kind of laying there. Okay, so you have all your cams loose. This one's facing forward. This was the most difficult part of the job, was actually getting the actuator out of this assembly. Like I said, this one's just laying there. You got to get this one high enough to where you can finagle this piece out of here, and I actually pulled it through the front. When I was able to clear this EGR here, I had to pull it through the front to get it out. It was really tough. Just take your time and don't force it. You don't want to damage anything, and it will come out. Underneath of this actuator, there's actually a half-moon rubber fitting that should come with your new actuator, as long with a gasket. When reinstalling, make sure you put a little bit of silicone on that half-moon under there, and the gasket has actually a lip on it that seals itself, so that doesn't need any RTV on it. This actuator is actually run by oil pressure. I did a lot of research when I was dealing with this issue, and if you do have a lot of sludge on top of the engine and you're having actuator issues, you may look into checking your oil pump or your screen down in your pan. I've heard a lot of people that had oil pressure issues with these. Also, which I didn't mention earlier, as you're turning the crank over to set top dead center, this thing is going to be moving up and down. That's normal operation. When removing this actuator, I actually never took the cams off of their chain links, just so I didn't mess it up putting back on. I recommend doing the same. Once you slide that actuator out, lay your cams back in place, and don't even take the chain off. Just leave it on there, that way you can't mess up your marks. When reinstalling, you're going to reinstall the same way you took it off. When getting the cams tightened down, be very careful. Start in the center and slowly work your way all the way around in a circular motion, slowly tightening down each one until you get that down. You do not want to damage any of these lifters or anything like that, or the lobes. A couple things I didn't mention earlier. When installing the new cam actuator, obviously you're going to have this tool on it and it compressed to be able to fit inside of that chain there. Once you get everything installed and you are starting the car, when you first turn the key, you're going to hear a loud rattling noise for a couple seconds. That's going to be this actuator regaining its oil pressure. So don't be alarmed when you start the vehicle. And also, before starting the vehicle, always on any vehicle, I always turn the crank over a couple times by hand to make sure that our timing marks are straight and we're not going to send our cylinder heads crashing into our valves and ruining our head.